This is PEP Radio Hour. Interviews, live call-in shows, and insights on topics that matter. A learning journey, edutaining, interactive, and inspiring. PEP Radio Hour. We say it as it is. Uncensored, up close and personal. Shift happens now at Siemens. And here are your hosts, Janine Van Zanus and Sebastian Zippler.
Hello and welcome, dear listeners, to our Roundtable podcast in Berlin on purpose-driven business. So how do we actually find purpose? And is purpose just another sexy label to maximize profit? And is it possible that Siemens could, is, or will transform into a purpose-driven business? Many years ago, my mentor said, Janine, in the question lies already the answer. So let's explore the questions together. And our interview guests from Siemens are Vinod Philipp, CEO Power Generation Services, Power and Gas in Berlin, Nandini Linton, Chief Transformation Officer at Power Generation Services in Munich, and Nadja Håkansson, Vice President and Country Division Lead Power Generation Services in Bangkok. Thank you so much for coming all the way from Bangkok just for this interview. And thank you also for stopping over from US before you go back to Munich after 4 weeks of traveling. Thank you so much for that. Our external guests are Anne Kaspari, who works in the areas of leadership development, transformative coaching, and sense-making, and Steffen Stoiber, founder and creative explorer of his company Create Meaning. Steffen is a purpose-driven entrepreneur in his early 30s. He represents today Generation Y, Gen Y, also known as the Millennials. Talk hosts and producers are Sebastian Zippler from Global Learning Campus, and I am Janine Van Zanus from the Modern School of Life. How do we actually define purpose? I like to start this roundtable with a story of Sally Blunt, Dean at the Kellogg School of Management.
Today in my remarks, I want to talk briefly about the purpose of business. To do that, I'm going to start by telling you a story, a very personal story. My dad died 10 years ago, and 5 years ago, my mom began to really struggle with dementia. 3 years ago, we moved her into a home that we very carefully had chosen. And for the first 4 days in that home, I stayed overnight with her to help the transition, because I remembered when we moved into a new house and I had a new bedroom, she did that for me as a child. And in those days that I stayed with her, I was inspired by this amazing group of caretakers on 3 North, a group of women who had worked together for over 10 years with older people who were losing their mobility, losing their memories, and losing their identities. And they created an amazing sense of intimacy and community. And they taught me a lot about how I should care and interact with my mom in this new phase of her life. I left very touched, and I left stronger and a deeper person. Fast forward 2.5 years, this past January, I was on one of my regular trips out to New Jersey to spend the day with my mom. And she kept saying, things have changed, things have changed. And I said, what's going on? She goes, things have changed. And I went in her bathroom. There were no towels. I looked underneath her sink. There were no toiletries. I went to find someone to help us, and I couldn't recognize any of the people I interacted with. So I went back in my room with her room, and I started Googling on my iPad, and I found out that this small, privately held chain of senior living homes had been sold to a very famous private equity firm 18 months ago. And that they'd done an amazing deal. It was brilliant. They'd taken the real estate from this chain and put it into a real estate investment trust and sold that off. And then they'd created a separate management company, which they were still holding on to. You guys know this drill. You guys know this story. I am certain that the owners did this to raise capital, cut costs, increase returns. And my guess is that they were quite successful. But at what expense? I would ask you, at what expense? Now you may say, don't be naive, Sally, you're a business school dean, you're all in, you know the game, isn't that the point, to maximize shareholder value? But I want to remind you, before you graduate, that that is not the point. The sole purpose of a corporation is not to maximize profits for its shareholders and owners. Just last summer, the Supreme Court wrote, while it is certainly true that a central objective of for-profit corporations is to make money, modern corporate law does not require for-profit corporations to pursue profit at the expense of everything else.
Sally Blunt finishes her speech with the following statement. It is through human intervention, through real people, that we can bring concepts of fairness, morality, and sustainability to life in markets. It is through people that markets grow wiser and kinder. In her definition and to my understanding, purpose-driven business is strongly connected with a sense of humanity and with serving evolving humanity. Vinod, what is your definition of purpose?
I think that for me, purpose is a articulation of a narrative that is of a higher level that gives you the orientation every day to be able to deal with the ups and downs of life. And for me, I think that the lesser the gap between my business purpose and my personal purpose, it allows me to integrate my work in life more effectively.
How much is purpose related to values? Because you're very strong in set of values.
I think that values make up a part of the purpose. So for me, one of my existential purpose is to contribute to making the planet a better place. Now, there are different elements of that. So one value of that is diversity. The other value of that is learning. The other value of that is respect, and so forth. So I think that values need to be nested in the description of one's purpose. And and if it is well aligned, then you can live your life, be it at work or home, without having to do any sort of a reboot when you come home and start a different life, right? Mm-hmm. So the more seamless the transition between what you do between 8 in the morning and let's say 6 in the evening and what you do outside those time blocks, it just makes it less stressful, less of a strain, and you can just manage your energy better.
Mm-hmm. Steffen, you come from generation Y. Why? The question why. What is my purpose? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Did it come natural to you? Was it really that in your generation there was no question on why, on what, but it was really a drive by why?
It's an interesting question. On one side, it was ingrained in me. I believe it's actually ingrained in every human being. It's not a new thing. Aristotle said, and this is my best definition for purpose, because when you Google it, there's over 1 billion search results, so you can have a long podcast around definitions. But he said, where your talents and the needs of the world cross, there lies your vocation. And I think that's and he was a little bit older than me and lived a little bit longer and definitely smarter in many ways. And for me, so it's an eternal quest that was always be there. Or Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. So we can put all of that on the table. I just think that my generation, although I have to say I might be a little bit different because I grew up through a very old system in the advertising industry. It was, I had the good parts of the old school and looked at the bad parts of the old school way of doing things. And I think in the people around me that are in the same age, they just saw how bad that could turn out in their parents, in older generation. And so there's a natural shift to...
What was the experience when you say how in your words, how bad it could turn out? What did you see and observe where you said, we want to make this different?
I mean, like, as I said, I can only speak about my own experience. I can't judge anything else. But what I noticed also when you consult a lot of different clients, you see a lot of patterns, and the sense of competition is deeply ingrained into the business world. And the reality is, especially the more complex our jobs get, we need to collaborate. And now, just looking into the round, we all had probably experienced sense of competition in our workplace, and not always it was for the better, neither of the company nor for ourselves. So this was one of the key things that I learned, in a way, because I was extremely competitive. The advertising industry is extremely competitive. I was very focused on winning awards and getting myself out there, and hit a few points of asking myself, is that really what it's all about? Is that the best use of my talents? Is that what the world needs? And if you ask yourself these questions that Aristotle raised, you come to very different answers. And I think the world is just waking up to this, that there's different answers to it. It's not a generational gap. It's just one of the essential truths of being a human being. And I think we're just waking up to that after being blinded quite a bit from the industrial age thinking. So that's my...
Organizations also look into purpose because they want to win over new talents, or there's this talent war in quotes. So they want to win over people like you. And I had a discussion with directors of an organization, and I asked them about their purpose. And they said, well, Janine, isn't it obvious? To make our customer happy. So my chin dropped because I wanted to talk more about purpose, but I knew there was no sense talking more about it because they really believed this is our goal, this is our purpose, it's one. Would this win you over? Is this enough to motivate you as a young new talent for a corporation to work?
In a way, that's also my goal with my job. So yeah, it's part of my purpose to make the people I'm working with happy. So I don't think it's good or bad. I think it's just one part of the equation, but there's many parts that are kept out. Do I make my coworkers happy? Do I make my shareholders happy? Do I make my family happy? Do I make my friends happy? And do I make the planet happy? So when I have that in the equation, yes, that would win me over. From personal experience, there's a few things that are usually left out. And one thing which is interesting about purpose, and I'm really curious about this conversation today, because purpose can actually also challenge an organization, because people sniff when it is... I'm not sure if we censor that stuff, but if it's not really lived, if it's bullshit, you have a really good bullshit detector. And then you're just like, oh, you say that, but on the other side, you're doing this. And then what happens in people, they see that, and then they just use purpose as a marketing claim. The same as, the brand was used before, certain values. I mean, let's look at the values of Monsanto. They have like innovation there and, maybe even diversity and other things, it's just, I just question their deep ethnicity, ethnic values.
No, I completely, the credibility and the trust, and we're talking at Siemens where collaborative growth culture and trust is a big part of it.
I think one of the dangers of talking too much about purpose is purpose becomes very intention-based, not action-based.
Yeah.
So people talk about purpose and they truly intend to do what they say they're going to do. And just because you have the intention doesn't mean that you actually have the behaviors and the outcomes that go with it. So when you ask me the question, what is my purpose? I struggled with answering it because I don't spend too much time trying to articulate intentions. I focus more on behaviors. So I think that's where sometimes the hype and the bullshit bingo starts with talking about purpose-driven and purpose-led, because we all have a lot of good purpose in our respective lives. We all wake up every morning with the right intentions, but from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, very few of us actually live and behave in line with those intentions and purposes. So I tend to be a bit cautious about...
It's integrity. So it's, do we walk our talk? And when I, for myself, have my values and my purpose, it's practice to walk it in integrity and to live my values and not just talk about it. And it's a stretch. Nadja, one of the first sentences you said when we got to know each other, I love to work for a larger purpose. So that was your motivator and your driver. As a leader in Bangkok, how does it affect your business decisions and also your leadership style?
every day when I wake up with connecting to my purpose. For me, I've worked a lot with myself to identify my higher purpose.
What is your higher
my
purpose?
higher purpose is to empower other women. That has been my core goal in life, that I contribute and make an impact in this world for other women, to give them the power to raise their voice, to give them the power to come in a space and own the space, so to say. That's what I do every day, by being the role model that I hope I am for my team, for my organization, for everyone that I interact with. And that impact that I make every day, my hope and wish is that the people that I affect take that with them in their hemisphere of people and environment, and pass it forward.
Let's ask a question into the round, so please feel free to answer the question. What is the difference between purpose-driven business and purpose-driven business culture? Now, we have few examples of Apple. Apple had the purpose to challenge the status quo by building something beautiful that's easy to handle. Then we have Patagonia, or we have Tesla, or we have Zappos. Zappos, Tony Hsieh wants to deliver happiness, but he makes sure that the environment has already happiness inside of them so that they can deliver happiness inside out. And then Patagonia wants to, with their outdoor clothing, they want to find solutions in the environmental crisis. So if you go to Patagonia, you can really sense the spirit of purpose when you go to their shops and when you read the website. The same is with Starbucks. Now, Howard Schultz was all about making a difference in people's life. So what is the difference between Patagonia and Tesla, or Patagonia and Apple? For instance, Steve Jobs was not necessarily known as a great leader who were empowering people with respect and mindfulness.
Nope.
But he was definitely, when he left Apple and he came back, the spirit was back again, he was definitely a visionary. Now everybody talks about purpose-driven businesses and mention Apple. So purpose doesn't necessarily relate to doing something good in the world, does it? My question to you.
You know, there are people who I can kind of see them thinking, gosh, Nandini, we didn't, how did you end up at Siemens? I mean, it's just doesn't seem to fit what we know of you. And I start with that because I think there's a larger purpose and then there's a way you live it.
Yeah, nice.
The power generation, both the manufacturing side and the service side, I think have similar purposes in terms of saying power to the people. I do like that phrase. Yeah, the world does need electricity, and it's about things like women saying, wow, there are now lights outside at night, I can feel safe to walk, or children reading their school books. Yeah, and that's an incredibly moving image. That's one thing, but what does that say to us about how we live it? First of all, does it help us make the business decisions? Yeah, that's always a question I have. And secondly, so how do we do that? And that's where my own purpose comes in, which is really to help these large organizations who, at least in Siemens and in many others, have over the years seen themselves as mechanisms, but they're all made up of people. So how can we bring a humanity and a respect and an appreciation for the differences into that?
So purpose and Sally Bland said the same. It's about the people. But then when we look at the market, we hear market movers, we hear the purpose economy, we hear challenging the status quo, we hear disrupting industry. So this does not necessarily connect to purpose-driven business culture. Is that right?
For me, what comes up is to distinguish here, because it's also like all of the different concepts have different parts and roles within the business. Purpose is also narrative. I totally agree. Apple has an incredible narrative. The intern in the company knows what they're about. If you walk into the Apple campus and you see, by Norman Foster, it's just beautiful. You like to work there. Don't want to comment yet on other offices that I've seen in my consulting life, but the reality is of beauty and art is lacking. So what Apple understood is the beauty, art, and narrative is successful, and the access to design, for me as a designer, I can definitely say that's one part of a purpose. Now, even if you look into the figures of history that have been, like Gandhi, also he was a human being. And when you look closer, there's also some flaws in his story. Still, he had a big purpose and did some incredible things. So we need to distinguish here between us as human beings who will be flawed in the system and the overall thing. But then comes the question of the responsibility. So for me, Apple is lacking massive responsibility in other areas to put and software on your phones that make them slower before the update of a new phone comes in order to make you drive to buy the next phone is pure evil. Period. And it's based, let's face it. And I mean, like, I've did other stuff like that in smaller things in my career, and we might have all that this is part of that game, but we need to challenge the underlying figure of the game where this is acceptable. And like, every company has these dark sides, these shadows, and they're normal. The question is, are we ready to face them? And if so, are we sincere about it? And if we're sincere about it, then we create a culture where people believe in the purpose. But if you don't do that shadow work, then purpose is just another nice business.
And what I would add, I very much like what you said. I think the way I would also distinguish between a purpose-driven business and a purpose-driven business culture is one helps align strategy, the other helps align people. And one brings clarity in business decisions, and the other one helps bring clarity in what's appropriate and inappropriate behavior. And in an ideal case, if they line up, then it's a very symbiotic, synergistic loop. And in other cases, like the example you just shared, if they don't line up, where there is a perceived noble purpose of the business, but the culture does not reflect that, then you start seeing these disconnects and this dissonance. So I think that they are interrelated, but clearly distinct.
It works also the other way around. I heard Ricardo Semler from Semco. I think he said the original sin of many of the startup companies is they get together now for the purpose of purpose. So they have a purpose culture, but they have no idea what they want to do with this. Yeah, so they don't have we want to, empower women, or we want to, do really cool design that people have access to, or something like that. So there's also a wobble in today's startup scene.
I think, whether it's a big corporation like Siemens or a startup, I believe every human being seeks clarity.
I want to have a choice.
To their own higher purpose, but also to the purpose of the company that they're working for, to make sure that there is an alignment. I believe definitely that there's an alignment with my own higher purpose and where I am today.
But can I add a thing to that, to backstep one step, and then we go there? Because I think you're very lucky to have your purpose stand out like this. I think purpose is much messier than that. Yeah, normally, even I, who am deeply in touch with it, I don't get up every morning and say, today my purpose, because purpose has this quality of it's fuzzy. Sometimes you cannot grab it, or it drags you, and you have no clue why it drags you. And you can spend like 10 years in a good relationship or in a good business, and you live your values, but you're not in touch with your purpose. Purpose can wait in the background until you're ready, and then it's. When you then stumble on it, because there's this nagging thing in the background,
It calls you.
and then it calls you, and you wrestle with it, and then it's you say, damn, it's deeply disruptive of your comfort zone. It's deeply disruptive of anything you build up, maybe of some relationships you're nice and cozy in, and call it home and comfort zone, and then purpose strikes, and it's like maddening, and then there's growth, and I don't think it's it's so clear cut, and when in the corporate world everybody talks about purpose, there's something wrong, and it has this, what Stefan, you talked about, this kind of, it has a marketing thing and a buzzword thing to it, but real purpose is like, it's gut-wrenching.
It touches you.
Yeah,
deep.
it's like an emergent thing. You kind of like, who said it? George Bernard Shaw. The greatest thing is being used by a purpose, and you don't want to go there because it disrupts.
It's not a cognitive concept.
Yeah,
That's right. And I like what you said about fuzzy. I would love to play another soundbite. He says why the why gets fuzzy and what's the purpose or what's the problem in organizations. Yeah. So it's Simon Sinek. I don't know if you know him. He is the author and the TED speaker. He received, I think, about 41 million clicks. So he's one of the top speakers, and he wrote the classic Start With Why. So Simon Sinek, in his Maastricht TEDx speech on what and why the why gets fuzzy in companies.
All organizations are founded on the same basic principles. There's some sort of measurement. It's often money, but it can be anything. And then there's time. And when an organization is founded, what they do and why they do it are inextricably linked. They're usually some founder or some small group of founders that are able to put their vision into words, and their passion inspires others to come and join them in pursuit of something greater than all of themselves. And they trust their guts, and off they go, and it's an amazing experience. The problem is, as they grow, as what they do becomes more successful, they can no longer rely on themselves. They have to now hire somebody who hires somebody who hires somebody who hires somebody who hires somebody who has to make a decision. Based on what? And what they do starts to grow, that metric. The problem is, why they do it starts to go fuzzy. And this is the biggest single challenge any organization will face. It's this thing right here, the thing that I call the split. Symptoms of the split inside an organization are when stress goes up and passion goes down. Symptoms of a split are things like when the old-timers, the people who were there from the founding, from the beginning, start saying things like, it's not like it used to be. It doesn't feel the same anymore. They can't quite put it into words, but they know it's not the same. Even though the organization might be more successful than it ever was in the past, it's just not the same.
Let's talk about the fuzzy part a little bit more, or the shadow part, as you said it, Stefan. We all midwife. We just heard from Nandani in the kitchen table wisdom we had already before we started here with our coffees. We all know those who went through a transformation privately or professionally, it can be a very messy process. So I have read about we change from an information economy to a purpose economy. But when we transform from A to B, how does a transformation, a change happen? How would you define it, Nandani, as a transformation officer?
If I may, I'd like to first say what it's not, because so often, and also in our company still, people don't talk transformation, they talk change management, which is some small group at the top goes off and comes back with some PowerPoints and tells everyone else how they should behave. And we laugh because we know it doesn't work. You get resistance, you get very little follow-up, and at some point the guys at the top say, I don't know what happened, I told them what to do. Yeah, I'm overdrawing this, but we all recognize this. And so what I've learned over the years is you not only don't just tell people how to change, because nobody likes it. We all like to change. We change voluntarily every day. I mean, I don't want to wear the same shirt every day. Maybe, Steve Jobs did, but that's okay. But we don't like to be told what to do. It's very human. Plus, we're losing so much insight and frontline wisdom if we have a plan for everyone else. And so what I've learned over the last 10 years, and more, but it's become very concrete over the last 10 years, is the more we can, yes, we need to have a direction that the company, the organization is willing to go. And that needs top leaders to be saying, yes, we want to go there. But then the more we can involve people up and down the organization, sideways, across the silos, and get them together and say, guys, here's the general outcome we need. But you know best for yourselves, but also for where you're sitting in the organization. What's the next step to get there? you tell us. And suddenly, if they're the ones who are telling you, you don't have to force them to go there.
That is so much. I'm smiling, and I'm smiling to Anne, because she has the belief that you need to hear the story of the people, and then it comes from them. There comes an action from the people. So you talked about viral change, also we note. And what is your experience with transformation, also with the obstacles? And you said something like the immunity of transformation. Yes, I'm very interested in that.
Let's consider the case that people actually do want to change and that they're not being changed from the outside, and also it's not talking about incremental change like getting better at something, but really something that you struggle to change. And there is, we all know how it is to change a bad habit of ours, let alone a good habit that we actually protect. And then somebody comes along and is like, well, we as a group, we as a community, or we as a department, there's digitalization, there's pressures from the outside. We need to adapt, we need to change. And there is a natural resistance to this, because we like our habits, we like who we are. It's a different thing than you say, okay, there's people and they have brilliant ideas, and most people, they really like their jobs and they want to contribute. And then there's might be a big system, maybe Siemens, maybe not, who doesn't let them because of bureaucracy, because of rules, because of added complexity, and they're kind of like then. And that is, of course, a transformational change or organizational development, it's called, in fancy terms, where you can actually liberate some of these structures, where you say, okay, how can we be different in this department if we take away what's hindering us? And we put in liberating structures. So that goes a long way. And then there's a change where you struggle, and we know it all personally. You struggle, your spouse tells you need to change this, and you kind of know, but you don't know how. And there's a lot of misunderstanding about how that works.
I like to bring in another soundbite of Dr. Joe Dispenza. I don't know if you know him. He's a neuroscientist, and he is an author of many best-selling books. One of the books is Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. So I like already the title. And he comes from neuroscience perspective. On impact theory, there's a great interview out there if you want to look at it. It's really good. And he talks about it, why it is so difficult for us to change our thoughts, because everybody says, oh, it's about a mindset shift. And then I ask corporations, how do you want to just introduce a mindset shift to your employees, to the people? Oh, we just write emails. So, we just write emails. So let's hear Dr. Joe Dispenza, what he says about it.
Most people, when they have a thought, they just think that that's the truth. And I think one of my greatest realizations in my own journey was, just because you have a thought doesn't necessarily mean it's true. So if you think 60 to 70,000 thoughts in one day, and we do, and 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts as the day before, and you believe that your thoughts have something to do with your destiny, your life's not going to change very much, because the same thought leads to the same choice leads to the same behavior creates the same experience, and the same experience produces the same emotion. And so then the act of becoming conscious of this process, to begin to become more aware of how you think, how you act, and how you feel, it's called metacognition. And so then, why is that important? Because the more conscious you become of those unconscious states of mind and body, the less likely you're going to go unconscious during the day. And that thought is not going to slip by your awareness unchecked, because it means to know thyself. The word meditation means to become familiar with. So as you become familiar with the thoughts, the behaviors, and the emotions of the old self, you're retiring that old self. As you fire and wire new thoughts and condition the body into a new emotional state, if you do that enough times, it'll begin to become familiar to you. So it's so important, just like a garden. If you're planting a garden, you got to get rid of the weeds. You got to take the plants from the past year and you got to pull them out. The rocks that sift to the top that are like our emotional blocks, they have to be removed. The soil has to be tenderized and broken down. We have to make room to plant a new garden. So primarily, we learn the most about ourselves and others when we're uncomfortable. Because the moment you move into that uncomfortable state, normally a program jumps in. When that program jumps in, it's because the person doesn't want to be in the present moment and engage it consciously.
I love his book. It's Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, and it makes so much more sense to understand why you're so pulled towards certain emotions that you actually say, I don't want to have them anymore. And also at work, I don't want to have that anymore. I don't want to have that anymore. So you go into resistance, but then you keep recreating and you think, shit, I'm there again. I had that situation a year ago and I find myself in the same situation again, or with the same boss again, or whatever. So I'd like to talk about some personal transformation experience. What was your experience when you said, I have worked on myself? I am in Bangkok. It's a busy city. I do need to meditate. Some people tell me they meditate 2 hours a day. I don't know how they, just to keep the focus and the balance, not to get crazy in the crazy times we have at the moment.
Meditation and self-reflection is for me key to keep myself centered. I think if there's one thing connecting to the message we just heard, I do believe in the power of thoughts. And if you start your day with positive thoughts and positive self-talk, your day is going to be a very good day. I strongly believe in that. So there's a great power in what you fuel your brain with and your body with every day to be your best self. If you're asking questions and if you're intentional with how you act during the day, that's also something that I've worked with, to be intentional with how I am in meetings, how I am in a dialogue with a member of my team, to be intentional and to really walk the talk. So I'm connected to my core values.
Can I bring in the messiness again?
Please do.
I mean, really, chapeau for this. For most people, it's not that easy, including myself. You know, what you said, Janine, is you find yourself in a pattern, you repeat the pattern with all your metacognition. You don't get why is this happening again? So you don't know what kind of habits of thoughts and emotions you're sitting on. Because when we're identified with some of these patterns, we don't see them. Yeah? We look through them, but we don't see, it's a victim or it's a different identity that I'm having. And things happen through you because you perceive through that identity, and there you go again, same situation, same type of relationship. So what we do in transformational work, we help people identify their starting position in the first place, because if you seem to be pretty clear, which is fantastic, about your starting position. But I've worked with so many people, bright men and women who have double PhDs and everything, and they find out they're sitting on a belief, a deeply held belief that they are not aware of, and it's most of the time, I'm not good enough, I can't do this. I'm a sucker for appreciation, and they're not aware, and all their conscious efforting goes into filling that gap without knowing. Yeah, and there is big, and that the red flag is what you talked about, Janine, the frustration.
Yes.
Well, again, how is it I'm ending up here again? And then we work backwards to find what you identified with in the first place, and then there's a how to integrate that and then create something new.
You know, one of the things that's going through my mind is I'm not sure if it's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
I like what you said about messiness. So if you ask me, you know, I have no idea what my transformation is. And I think growing up in India, I think in the Eastern culture, many times this desire for clarity and meaning is not there. So if you go back to Indian philosophy and mythology, you know, life is the way it is. And, you know, you have a certain destiny, and, you know, you will get there where you get there, or when you get there. So I think for me personally, what I observe a lot, and my wife is part German, part Greek, so very Western. And I don't know what drives what, but that's why I have a hard time articulating purpose. I have a hard time describing my transformation. I think that I'm comfortable with the paradox of life.
Nice.
I'm comfortable with the fact that certain things I'm in charge but not in control. That's one paradox, right? I have to think long term and short term. That's another paradox. I want to spend time at work and I want to spend time with my family. It's another paradox. So I find myself very rarely being frustrated because life is messy. And accepting the fact that life is messy has helped me. If I had known that maybe 10 years ago, I wouldn't have lost my hair. But now that I've lost my hair, life is messy. You know? It's one less thing to worry about. So maybe I'm not sure how much of this is also a bit of a deep cultural, socio-religious framework that we sometimes have to also reflect on.
Well, so you know, having grown up in India, although I don't look Indian, I share a lot of that. Yeah? And in my experience, there's two things. One is, I think, to practice the self-reflection, as we were here, is incredibly valuable and important. But frankly, personally, my biggest transformations personally and also in my career usually came because of something that hit me on the head that I wasn't expecting. And it's so you could call it a crisis, if you will.
Thrown into it.
You get thrown into it. It wakes you up. And you suddenly start asking those very basic questions, right? And then starts the reflection.
Exactly. And there's some swear words around it.
Oh, no, more than a few.
I would first of all love to honor what I hear now, because this is actually not that often that I encounter that in the business world. Maybe it's the format that we have the ability to talk about that, but many managers and high, board members and whatever that I came in contact with, these words wouldn't be spoken. Wouldn't be spoken in their position. Maybe in a private thing over a beer would be different, but first of all, I would love to honor that because it's really interesting. That's also the paradox I'm stuck with, and I think the interesting part is how do we integrate that? Right. For me, I had some really big transformative moments being in India and understanding a lot of the messiness, because when you come as a German to India, it's the polar opposite. Just try to get the train.
On the train.
Get on the train. Everything, right? But like once I dropped into this acceptance of this is the way it is, and yes, I know it goes different, but I go with the flow. It was beautiful. I had incredible encounters and smiles and all of that. And yet also there's something really to be said about structuring the way that Germans do, and I only speak from my growing up. So for me, it's not an either or, it's an integration of both.
Yeah.
And let's make it a little bit abstract, but like on one side, also all of the spiritual traditions come from the integration of male and female, or like the yin and yang symbols, chaos and order, and all of these different things. For me, chaos is India, but there's the heart, there's the intuition, there's the warmth of the human messiness. And order is the machine, which, where most of the, let's say, Western...
Productivity, effectiveness, all of that comes in.
How do we get that together? And what I see in companies, that one part is we're really trained on that muscle, and we're really, really at the beginning. And just, basic stuff, or emotional intelligence, just smile to somebody, be nice, ask open question. We're not talking about, serious complexity theory here, just the basics. I find in many companies not working.
I really would love to brag about Power Generation Services, because I was blown away last week. I mean, we've been talking about how to start this transformation, how to take it along for more than 2 years. But honestly, last Tuesday, with 144 of the senior leaders, but also a lot of wild cards, younger people, award winners. So it was not just exclusively that super group. We actually went through Robert Keegan's Immunity to Change.
That's the one.
We had 2 of the top leaders on stage. I also joined them, so we'd have a female voice and a different map, but they shared every step of their map. Everyone did this at tables. We had volunteers standing up and sharing with the rest of the room. I mean, this is tough stuff, and I knew it would be a stretch. but I had no idea how many of them would really be able to embrace it. And we're going to keep following up, because that brings the shadow side, right?
Oh, yeah.
And the shadow isn't always something horrible, but it's that commitment to something else, and that belief, as you were saying, Anna, I'm not good enough, or I want to empower my people, but if I give up control, I'll lose it all. You know, there'll be chaos. I'll lose my job. Besides the fact that the whole place will go down the right. I mean, that's not just paradox. That's real opposition, right? And these are things most of us would have that somewhere in us.
Absolutely.
But to actually face it. And say, what are we going to do about it? Can we test it? I think that's amazing.
It's very, because I wanted, and this is also my pitch to you, Sebastian, because we wanted to talk about what are we going to do at Siemens and how would we integrate what we said and how can it be integrated into the Siemens world. Sebastian, you did some research, what is happening inside Siemens? Where are people actually standing so far from what you researched?
Before we come to this question, I would like to go to your point, Nandini. It's the point that the people don't follow us when they listen what we say, or don't follow us when we present them some PowerPoint, stuff like this. They are following us when they see that we walk the talk. And what you said about last Tuesday. I think this was an example, a really good example, so that they can get in touch with each other. And this is only possible with my experience when we show our own vulnerability, so that we say, I'm a human. If we share the same values, if you share the same interests, if we share the same purpose, there's a band of trust, or there's a band of trust possible. And when we go to this transformation, call it PG transformation, call it PS transformation, whatever, we need this kind of trust. And this is a stretch, a real stretch. So we have to make our business. And Joe Kaeser spoke about the purpose of Siemens. It's to serve the society and make real what matters. This is a higher purpose when I go deeper to the purpose of PS and PG, power to the people. How we can overcome this stretch to run the business and invite our employees, invite the people to start reflecting themselves, or invite the people who started to show up as lighthouses so that other people can join.
Can I give a quick example? Sure. Because I visited the facility in Charlotte 2 weeks ago, and they had asked the guys on the shop floor, right? These are hourly wage earners. They said, well, you know, what are we here for? And they'd had actually discussions and a competition, and someone said, we keep the turbines turning. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool, because service maintains all of this. And then while we were walking around, one of the guys said, oh, here, come meet this fellow. He's the one who came up with the winning phrase. So I said, that's fantastic. And they said somehow, oh yeah, and he did the graphics as well. Well, as a result, I have a t-shirt, which I actually wore last night, which has a little graphic design, and it says, keep the turbines turning. And this guy who's working in the factory said, oh yeah, I was an art major. And here he is, repairing turbine blades. Wow. And seems happy enough. Yeah. But so you get depth and you get into people really quickly. And again, an example of hourly wage earners. We're not talking managers here, but they do this stuff too. And they've come up with this wonderful phrase that's so meaningful for them. I'm so proud to wear that shirt.
I think to build on that, I mean, in my experience as a manager or leader, when you think about business transformation and managing all these different dimensions, I think it's about the lens you use to look at the situation, right? And there are fundamentally, at least for me, 4 different lenses. And I think all of these lenses are valid. It's a question of picking the right lens at the right time. So you can look at an organization as a machine. So that's when we use language like workshops and processes and efficiency and work streams and tools. So that language represents us using our machine lens to look at the organization. The other lens is the lens of a team. So when we talk about winning and losing, competing, competition, coming together for team building, that's the lens of looking at the organization as a team. Mm-hmm. Then you have the lens of culture. So when you talk about diversity, you talk about multicultural, you talk about regional, then you're bringing in the lens of culture. And then finally, I think, which is the one that is least used, is the lens of an organic being. So when you talk about transformation, you talk about growth, you talk about shaping.
Non-linear processes.
Non-linear. So then the organization is an organic lens. And what we end up seeing is that depending on the background of the manager, in this example, this art major, for example, as a leader, is that we will find ourselves predominantly using one or the other lens. And the moment you have a predominant bias, then you are losing the value of the other lenses. So when we look at transformation from our perspective, we try to have all these different lenses in there. So we need to have a certain amount of structure. We need to have a certain amount of freedom, the organic part. We need to have a certain element of culture, and we need to have a certain element of winning and celebrating, appreciating successes. So I think that you need all these four lenses, and you have to use them in a, and that's a skill, right? It's not something that there is an equation behind it. You have to train yourself, practice, so that you start getting better at using the right lens at the right time, so you know where to nudge. And I think, to me, this is where a lot of the power can come from.
Absolutely.
When we look at the headquarters, how far are they when it comes to purpose?
Tough question.
I always ask the tough questions.
I know. It's the first time. It's not the first time. No, I think inside the headquarters, and I'm from the Global Learning Campus, from the HR, I call it sometimes Ivory Tower. So I think there are a lot of people who are very interested in to change this kind of or breaking the walls of this ivory tower. Let me say it this way. There are a lot of grassroots movements, and we have the Grow to Glow, for example. It's an empowering network for women. And then we have the Grains initiative. It's a huge network for colleagues who are interested to make something real, what matters for the people and for the company. And we have, for example, the Equal Footing initiative, stuff like this, to mention this. We have in Berlin, in March, next year in March, we have it's called in German, Augenhöhe Camp. And I see Nandini nodding, so you know this. And this is a real interesting thing. People all over different hierarchies, different roles, stuff like this, they are combining their forces to bring the company forward and to bring the people forward as well. And this is an important thing I see. And there's something changing inside the corporate organization to switch from thinking in terms of hierarchy, thinking in terms of roles. So this is a point, I think it's a major change we start to go.
I think I want to just add something, because Anna said this. I think for a company that is as big and as broad and as dispersed as Siemens, I think our sense of purpose will be messy. It will be fuzzy, because on a very macro level, we can take what is said in terms of having an impact to society and making real what matters. That is a certain level of aggregation, right? And then we now have our 6 different operating companies and strategic companies. And I think it is up to us to work with each of our teams to translate that into something what makes sense for the subsystems. And so I think that there is a general, and we see this every year. We have the Siemens Business Conference, and one of the most, for me, the most emotional and empowering moment is when we have the Werner von Siemens Awards, where there are thousands of people around the world who apply for these awards, and a few get selected, and it's like
Wonderful.
It's amazing. And then you see people from all over the world show up, and they're all super proud, super passionate about the company. And you can see there is a commonality of purpose. They realize that Siemens is one of the few companies that can deliver solutions at scale, which have a fundamental effect on the economies of countries and societies. That's, I would say, the overarching purpose. And then how we manifest itself, how we break it down into the respective organizations, that varies. And I think generally speaking, because of the regional span, the closer you are to the customers, like for example, Nadia in Thailand, there is a much more granular sense of purpose because you see your customers every day. And then maybe you go away from the regions, purpose becomes a little bit more meta level. But I think that there is a fundamental shift for the better taking place in the company.
Let's talk about PS, because our listeners are coming from PS, and how can they now integrate what they've heard? Some of them might have heard of purpose, some for them it's pretty new, but they're kind of intrigued. So what is the next step for them? What is the next step for the listeners?
I can take a stab at it, and then if you want to add, right? So I think the way we are trying to articulate our purpose is around this notion of energy transitions. So we see PS is a very regional business. And what we see is that in every one of our countries where our customers are, they all have a very unique take on how they want to transition to a cleaner, more sustainable energy future. So how India wants to get there is going to be different from how Thailand wants to get there versus the US versus Germany. So I think we are not there yet. We are still trying to craft what would be a well-rounded purpose. But generally speaking, we see that there is an energy transition taking place across the world in large scale, small scale, decentral oil and gas based generation. And what we want to orient ourselves around is to say we provide the know-how, the competency, the services to our customers to help them in their energy transition journey. And that would be, we have to make it customer specific, because it's very dangerous to take a model that works in Germany, for example, and say this is the way it should be done in Asia, or this is the way it should be done in Latin America. So we are forming that, but with all frankness, we are not. I don't think we are there yet. We are still in that messy stage right now.
Yeah, that's what I really learned today. Except the world is messy. I really learned that. I really like it, because I also flew into Mumbai. And the shock that you have when you step out from the airport is like, whoa, and I was prepared. But now seeing it from a sense, not just a state of acceptance, but from a state of embracing the messiness, I really take this away. I really like it, because we are in a corporate world where we like control, where we like to know how it goes. So we do have goals. And to embrace it, it's not always the way. I think this is something that's beautiful to learn. Nanani, you also, as a transformation officer, you said in our kitchen, you said you are kind of the midwife. So again, for our listeners who listen to this, who are sitting together in teams, how can they integrate purpose into their culture, into their team life?
So there are a couple of things. I think Vino's already talked about the purpose side. I'd like to come to the, so how can we begin to live it side? And through talking to so many people across, up and down, sideways, across the organization, I think there are really 3 levers that will help us change. One is what we call 360-degree inclusion, which means turn a full circle to look at your stakeholders. Who are you impacting with something you're doing? Talk to more people, inside, outside, across the silos. While you talk to them, be radically transparent. Share information. We need easy access to information for innovation, for just getting our work done well, for understanding the other person. So if something's, legally restricted, that's fine. I'm not talking about this. But everything else, share it. And finally, what we call extreme ownership, which is indeed, leaders need to be clear about the goals so that they can say, you are responsible for this piece. And then it's a discussion because the other person needs to really understand it, maybe question it, and then be accountable for it. So my message to people would be, know that these are 3 things that are being consistently pushed and worked on, but we're at the beginning of the journey. So please push your managers, push your colleagues, demand it for yourself, live it yourself. And frankly, we try to get a lot of people sharing experience about this on SSN. There's the PS Transformation Group. There is all of the PS News. There's the PG Transformation that gets some of it. Do try to go, because that's where a lot of this information comes. And that's where I personally try to live the transparency of sharing also, here's what I'm learning. I'm not perfect. It's messy. But here's how I'm thinking.
That goes along with the vulnerability aspect that you said. Be vulnerable and be open and transparent.
Right, and it's a real invitation to the people to follow each other, to follow the customer, and focus on the behavior, as you mentioned before, that we have to go forward. And the thing is, it's good to know that we probably have this messy purpose. Otherwise, if we do not have it right now, but probably it's some kinds of a seed inside my body to think about this. And in the same instance, I can try to start this behavior, as you said, Nandini.
Nadia, how do you see it? I mean, you see it from a different angle, right? So what's your take on the power generation services transformation journey?
Well, my take on it personally, how I convey this in my teams, is that I want them to feel that they are empowered. They don't have to ask permission to take initiative. And if something is unclear, then ask. Be part of creating the solution. Don't just sit and wait for someone else to bring you the information. Take your own initiative. And I mean, I see examples where I have to step in and say, just pick up the phone and call your colleague in Sweden or in Germany. It's not harder than that. So the communication, there is some sort of barrier, if it's because of personal fear, that it's more comfortable to sit behind the computer and send an email instead of just communicating. I don't know. But in those situations, I try to be a role model and convey that it's better with a quick call and solve it. So I do believe that people are still a little bit held back to be part of the transformation. They're asking to get permission. And my personal statement is, don't ask for permission. Own the space.
This was one we spoke about in the briefing with you, Vinod, and later on with Nadia, that this is a part of the culture as well we have to respect. So as I learned today, it's not solely part of the Indian culture to ask for permission. It's fine. It's life. It goes on. I do it, and we will see what happens. But in the other Asian culture and in for example the German culture, as far as I experience this, we are trained, very much trained, to ask for allowance, to ask for permission, and how can we invite these colleagues to start to break with this behavior? Is there something you have planned in your transformation? So it's a really hard change.
It's usually, I think, having young kids, I think positive appreciation is the best way to trigger the right behavior. So one of the things that we start doing now, and Tim Holt, division head, started this about 2 years ago. We have these annual awards. And one of the awards is called Failure Hero. And even the name itself was a bit edgy. So when we were thinking about what to name the different categories, we said, let's pick some non-traditional names. So like Customer Whisperer, the Innovation Brainiac, I think, which are the life preserver for health and safety, and then failure hero. And failure hero was the one we spent a lot of time debating. And in the first year we put this award out, we got in the first few weeks very little nominations because people were afraid to talk about their failures. And then we had to kind of, reinforce the message, and then we started getting some first nominations, and they were all this, I would say, initially were very fluffy, right? Like it's like the classic interview question, what's your weakness? Well, I'm a perfectionist. So that was the kind of failure hero things coming out. Now, 2 years in, it has become a very popular award. The number of applications have gone up. People talk about the failures, and we recognize and we give an award to the team that dealt with a big failure, learned from it, and then improved, and then somehow brought it home, right? So I think positive appreciation, positive recognition of the behaviors you see when people show ownership, when people show radical transparency, when people show inclusion, recognizing that, and then people see it. And then I think it becomes a much more positive tailwind versus being afraid and then punished to do something else, right? So I think that's something which we have learned is appreciation goes a long way in creating the right behaviors.
I learned so much today. Maybe I'm going to be a role model for failure hero. I'm a messy messenger and I'm a role model for being a failure hero. I really like that. The new job description, great. Because I'm struggling too. So how I describe my job, as you do, Stefan, sometimes, where you said I'm a creative explorer. When you talk about positive appreciation, I have seen some people who have learned that. And then, of course, they know, first I have to appreciate before I can come to the point. And you really have that. It's like not for you, like it's integrated. For them, they have learned it in the books on page 97 of an appreciation book. And now they say, I need to appreciate. And when I had them in front of the camera, it is so, you feel it. They just appreciate because I've learned it, but actually they want to come to the thing that doesn't work good. So, and it's really annoying if you see this is 380 people in TV studio who just had the same book and the same page 97, where everybody learned to appreciate, and then it doesn't come across authentic. Then you have no authentic leadership style or authenticity in communicating. We had it once. We have a very appreciative communication style, I think. Yeah. But in one thing, I got very pissed, in quotes, not with you, but just with, and I got very tough. And I said to him, I felt while I was talking to you, I felt, this is Basti, this is your sweetheart, don't talk to him like this. And then I said, after the conversation, I'm really sorry for what I just did. And he said, no, I loved it, it gave energy. I was really giving a lot of power, said, give me the numbers, we get that. And I was really pushy in that way, but it was very authentic. I still had an appreciation for the process. So what would you say to people when leaders come and employees come, they have learned about positive appreciation, they start to understand it, how does it come across authentic when things are tough?
The question itself is kind of implying that people are always supposed to be nice. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's, to me, something completely different from A, being authentic, and B, even being positively appreciative, right? You need to be true to how you're feeling because, as you said at the beginning, we have a bullshit detector. Whether it's about, is this company's purpose just a marketing slogan, or does this person mean what they're saying? Right? So it's actually counterproductive to say, that's so great. If I don't mean it, you know it. Right? So by the same token, like you were, if something is not right, we need to say it honestly. You don't have to be abusive when you do it, But to be honest about that, and then the other way, we're at the end to say, well, thank you, we ended up in a great place. I mean, that's appreciation too.
One thing I learned again, there's some really basic tricks in the toolkit or tools in the toolkit when we have the machine lens on that really help, and I call that capacity building. Nonviolent communication is just one of them. It's just at the beginning it's clumsy, you're like, this is what I noticed, and this, there's a certain way of going about it. Somebody who hasn't done nonviolent communication, but I can only say that, for example, in my relationship, and I read these books together with my girlfriend, and then we really practice with each other, and it's powerful. It's so powerful, and it's so easy. And I would advocate for something like, how do we split this process also in two things? One is capacity building of the individual. And it's an individual journey, and people resonate with the individual tools. So how could we as leaders provide them with different toolkits? One could be meditation, another one could be nonviolent communication, like whatever that is that helps them to get to that state of self-reflection, to able to handle this thing in a better way than before. Like as we grow up as human beings, I did a lot of things when I was 16, which I wouldn't do now anymore, which got me into a lot of trouble, and I learned from it. But how can we accelerate that to have a better working environment? And then on the other side, how do we create a common narrative that helps us to inspire people to take action, to say like, this is important because, and what I'm missing here, and I really love this format because now we can communicate these open conversations. Most of corporate communication I've seen internally is really difficult and horrible, to be very honest.
Your face shows it already.
We spent millions on advertising, so I was on that side. We crafted everything, we shot, like we waited for 3 days to get the perfect light on the whatever it was, like it's crafted to the outside. And there's, I think, one of the dishonesty. What happens when we take this art and beauty to the inside? Look at religions. They did that. If you go into a church or a mosque or a temple, it's beautiful, especially in India. It's beautiful storytelling over the walls. And most of these temples have been built over so many years that most of the people worked on it, never saw it finished. That is purpose. Stonehenge was built over 500 years. To work on that is purpose. It's, I get sometimes impatient when a project is not finished in 3 months, right? So we're talking about transformation, which, 500 years might be a little bit long. Who knows where we are in humanity back then? But like just the next 10 years, do we have the capacity to see that and the capacity to build what's needed in order to get into that state that people are willing to work on something bigger than themselves? And these are some of the fundamental questions. What I'm totally missing in the discussion, and most of the corporations that I know of and I work with, is art and beauty. And it's just absent. And I feel that's one of the things that's on the other side, the capacity individual and art and beauty to inspire people on the other.
I like that very much.
It's very nice. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful end closure because we're running out of time. We promised Grit that we are going to be ended by 11. It's 10:58, so we have to stop. Thank you so much. There was a beautiful completion also, the art of beauty. You said beauty and art?
Both of them say, because beauty talks to the soul.
Yes.
And there's this football over there that says paint pictures evoke emotions. We can only do that if we talk to the soul. And this is what purpose in the end is all about. Is the soul, is what we can define and will never do. So far no human being has made it. So we need to accept that it's undefinable. And for me, that's the soul of the company that you can feel and sense when you go in it.
Yes.
And when you feel and sense that it's not there, then you need to do something about it. I think that's very simple.
It's beautifully said, because you cannot build it in a, yes, I think that's true. You cannot build it in a PowerPoint presentation. And that is very crucial to hear this in corporation. And also what you say, it's about the soul, and the soul cannot be, you cannot, like in personality assessments, you always try to figure people and human behaviors out, but the soul is the essence and it goes beyond it. So I really love that. Thank you so much. Before I complete this, and we together complete this beautiful, strong, powerful roundtable with another soundbite of Simon Sinek's keynote on trust, I'd like to thank our interview guests from Siemens, Vinod Philipp, Nandini Linton, Nadja Hakonson, to our excellent guests. Thank you so much, Steffen Stoiber, Anne Kaspari. Big time thanks also for the great support of Global Learning Campus, Volker Rosen and Kai Liebert, who have given us freedom, trust, and finances to go on a learning journey. And we did, and we are still learning. Messy learning journey it was. And to create this, we believe, this awesome format together. Also thanks to our great support team, Julia Reed, Ronit Lea Degelmann, Regina Schippers, and Grit Trautenhahn. I call it the mother courage of PS. I hope that is okay. So this was PEP Radio Hour from Berlin with my wonderful partner. He is the master of creating great synergies and networks. Thank you so much, co-host Sebastian Zippler. I was Janine Benzines. And dear listener, have a wonderful, wonderful, inspiring day. Please exchange your ideas, but also your insecurities, your doubts on purpose-driven businesses. Very important. Some people say, no, don't say this. I say, yes, if you have fears or doubts or insecurities, share this. We are going to meet again on December 6th. in a next round that's going to be much more nerve-wracking with audience. And you wanted to say something in the end.
I would like to say thank you to you for your energy, for your dedication, and you moderated so great, and I'm so thankful to working with you.
Same here, same here. Thank you so much. So before it gets too emotional, let's close the soundbite with Simon Sinek on trust, also part of the collaborative growth culture.
This is what trust is. Trust is human. It's about human interaction. It's about real conversations. What we need is more handshake conversations. What we need is more handshake discussion, more handshake debate, more handshake friends, more handshake leadership. If we don't, then we continue to go through this, and we will not find our own sense of fulfillment and happiness and inspiration. It requires being amongst people who believe what we believe.